Chapter 2 Farewell to Siloa. What seemed like a moment later, but in actuality may have been much, much longer, Aradis was abruptly awakened as a strong hand took his own hand and pulled him to his feet. The lad glanced up to see who had roused him. It was Nagello, who had resumed the guise of a mere man, a humble traveler. Aradis looked around and saw that he was still in the clearing in Rimwold Forest, and it was still night. Gasping in amazement, he rubbed his eyes vigorously to assure himself of his surroundings. Waiting until Aradis had recovered from his daze, Nagello quietly addressed him.
What you have seen was shown you that you might know with certainty that I am indeed a messenger of the Danna,
he said.
For you will have to do many hard things in the days to come, and you will need to clearly remember this night to be strong enough to do them.
The image of Nagello's unveiled splendor still burned vividly in Aradis's mind.
Please, sir,
Aradis exclaimed, panting.
Tell me, are all of the Hadathi as terrifying as you in their true forms?
To the Barada, yes.
The Chassidim returned.
And some to an even greater degree than I. All Hadathi are exceedingly powerful, but not all are frightening to mortals for the same reason. For there are Hadathi who are uncorrupted, and they are terrifying to the impure on account of their great purity. Such am I. But there are also Hadathi who are defiled and depraved, and it is their great malice and atrocity that strike fear into the hearts of the Barada.
You have shown me, beyond all doubt, that the existence of the Hadra is not to be doubted, and that it is to be held in great esteem.
Aradis stammered, shaking a little.
But may I beg your pardon, sir, for I must ask, how am I to know that you are not among the wicked Hadathi, and that you do not mean to deceive me, or do me great harm?
Fear not to ask such a thing, son of Darian,
Nagello replied.
In truth, it is a necessary inquiry, for there are, as I said, sinister Hadathi, and these may feign good intent and, yet, lead the Barada into darkness. Yet the hallowed and the profane may be differentiated in three main respects. First, the acts and speech of the Eladar, that is, the uncorrupted Hadathi, always lead to the increase of true light in Orona. This is not so with the Calathar, the Hadathi who have become wayward. Secondly, the Calathar speak messages and perform deeds which are contrary to the behests of the Danna. Such is never the case with the Eladar. And finally, the proclamations of the Eladar all come to pass, while those of the Calathar do not. Thus, regard me as a vile impostor and pernicious deceiver, if all that I am about to tell you does not take place exactly as I foretold that it would. But if all things do happen according to my word, then know that I am who I claim to be.
If this is so,
Aradis wondered,
how am I to know I have not gone amiss in my own understanding of the Danna and his directives? For this very night, I have found my images of the Danna and the Hadra badly disturbed. Indeed, I had thought the Hadra to be a comforting place, where the Danna drifts about in a happy country called Erdion. But seeing you as you really are, annihilated all such convictions. Now I don't know what to think about all this.
Nagello explained.
The correct apprehension of such things was given long ago, and all falsehoods have come afterward. And there is a testimony of it which is known as the Illyrion. But it is not yet time for you to know all such things as have been revealed there. Indeed, only what is requisite shall be given you now. As for the Hadra,
The Chassidim went on.
It is neither comforting nor troubling in and of itself. It is what it is, just like Orona. But the things which take place there are sometimes of great consolation, and are other times violently unsettling. But, most importantly, it must be pointed out that the Danna does not drift, as you say, Aradis, like some untethered mist. Neither is he a sedentary being. All this you ought to have known if you had heeded the instruction of your father.
Yes, I suppose my father did explain that to me.
Aradis admitted, looking down sheepishly at the forest floor.
Your father taught you other things as well.
The Hadathi asserted.
He taught you the name of the Danna, his personal name.
He looked hard at Aradis. Then he quietly asked,
And what is that name?
Aradis thought for a moment, then tentatively replied,
Telion. But we usually just refer to him as the Danna.
As do many.
Nigelo remarked.
And the Danna he is, though many have strayed from a proper understanding of that designation. But his name is Telion. He is the true king of both Kazimar, the material, and the Hedra, the immaterial. He reigns from the great hall of Rostobeth atop glorious Mount Azaru in the bright city of Everhold in Erdion, which is a happy country indeed. The happiest, in fact. And he is fully aware of all that comes to pass in Orona, which is the reason I knew of your quarrel with Tarek, even of the guilt you felt for being caught in the act of fighting with him as your father entered the forge.
At this point, Aradis no longer found it quite so arresting that Nigelo knew such things as these. Why should he not know them if he really were one of the Hadathi, the mighty creatures of the Hedra? But still, he was greatly ashamed of what he had done that evening.
You know my father, then?
Aradis inquired abruptly.
I know him.
Nigelo answered.
And that is why I said I hoped for better from a son of his. But you are not yet what you ought to be, and you will not become thus until the Danna should bring it about in his own manner and at his own time. For still there is much you do not know about the world that you will learn in the days ahead. But mark this well, son of Darian. Do not forget that it was Telion who sought you out, not the other way around. And it is he who will bring these matters concerning you to completion. And it is by his hand that the name of Kingblade shall be called blessed, as it was long ago.
Nigelo's words were quite cryptic now, as Aradis might expect from one of the Hadathi. But he pressed him.
Long ago? How long ago? When my father was young? Sir, I have no doubt you know my father. But does my father know you?
Ask him yourself before you leave.
Nigelo replied curtly.
Before I leave? What are you talking about?
Aradis asked, astounded.
The message I came to bring you is that you must leave Siloa immediately, this very night.
Everything in Aradis's mind rejected this notion wholeheartedly.
No! You cannot ask that of me! No, you do not understand! I cannot simply leave Siloa in the middle of the night, no matter what it is that...
You would gainsay Telion?
Nigelo asked, raising an eyebrow.
Well, Telion surely knows that I'm needed here, and that I can't just go traipsing off into the blue one night.
Aradis explained.
Telion knows a great deal more than you give him credit for, Aradis Kingblade, and it would be exceedingly foolish on your part to think you know better than he what you ought to do with your life.
But see here!
Aradis protested even more adamantly.
I can't just march off and leave my family and do whatever it is that you're going to try to convince me to do.
Aradis,
Nagello said firmly.
Telion has commanded that you leave Siloa this very night. And if he is thus commanded, there can be no greater path of wisdom than to obey. Do you really imagine that he can be fully aware of every word that passed between you and your brother, every aching cry of your father, the resilient spirit of your sister, and the admirable dedication of your mother, and still be utterly oblivious to what is best for you and your family? Is Telion some dolt who will be told what is best for all concerned by the likes of Aradis Kingblade?
Nagello's voice now resonated deeply as he continued.
Were you there when Telion came forth from Anomaris, the timeless vaults, and opened the doors of the hours at Osora, the last mountain, when the world began? Were you present at the forging of the Kalarna, the jewels of time? Was it you who uttered the first of the Cassina, the proclamation which brought all of the Hadra into being? Do you really suppose you have greater knowledge and wisdom than Telion? Tell me, if you can, what lies on the far side of Remura, the sea of the heavens, where even the Hadathi cannot go. Do all the winds of Orona heed your call? And can you guide the path of Marda, the sun, and Aereth, the moon? Have you passed into the heart of Orona through the flaming forges of Tenegrin, the fire realm? Have you journeyed to the deepest vales of Solansu, the realm of the Sea Lords? Is your advice to be weighed more heavily than the king over both Kazamar, the material, and the Hadra, the immaterial? Can you command all of existence by the mere power of your word? If not, then I suggest you do as Telion commands.
There was nothing Aradis could possibly have said to counter this without sounding like an utter fool, and he recognized that ultimately he would have to do whatever it was that Telion mandated. So he sighed grimly, much humbled.
With such words, I cannot dispute. Very well then. What is my task?
Nagello replied, his voice hushed and fiercely articulate.
Now listen carefully, Aradis. You must not forget a single thing I say to you. You are to leave Siloa this very night and go to the port of Tarwin. There you will purchase passage to the Font Skulls in the Endurian Deeps, specifically to the island of Stragmore. There is a town there named Dankdocks, and in that town there is a place not far from the shore called the Droughtfish Inn. There you will inquire after a man named Felding Starwash, who is well known by all the people in that town. He will provide you with passage to the great Neathmarda of Byram, to the port of Garandil, and from there you will go to the great city of Anganor, the capital of the kingdom of Argonis, which lies in the region known as the Elder Forest.
Aradis was becoming greatly aggravated.
I don't really know where any of those places are except for Tarwin.
He protested.
Mostly because it's in Valaris and rather an important city, though still several hundred miles from here. But Byram, that's thousands of miles away, isn't it? Am I really to travel so far across the world? But I can't possibly remember all of these names you're telling me.
You will remember them.
Nagello assured, and then continued.
Now, upon your arrival in Anganor, you must seek audience with the king of Argonis, Thornoak by name. He is one of the Ingans.
And who exactly are the Ingans?
Aradis inquired.
You would know them as the Tree Folk, for that is how they are oft referred to in your tongue, especially by those who do not regularly associate with them. However, the Ingans themselves do not much care for the term Tree Folk. Nevertheless, the name is somewhat apt, for they do look rather like trees with faces and arms and legs, although they are not much taller than menfolk. Yet trees they are not, for they are Barada, just like menfolk, elves, dwarves, gnomes, and all the rest of the Narthana. Now, as I was saying, when you reach Anganor, you must seek audience with King Thornoak. That task alone will be no simple matter, though once you have spoken with him, he will be able to help you accomplish your ultimate business there.
And what is that?
Asked Aradis, who was growing more bewildered every moment.
You must heal the hurts of that land and reunite its people, who have succumbed to bitterness, strife, and fear to such a degree that the kingdom is on the verge of collapse. Once you have done this, you must commence a far more difficult task. You must destroy the witch Ravinia the Heartless, who has taken up residence in Blackbough Woods, a dark and wild region several hundred miles to the west of there. And in so doing, you will rescue the kingdom of Argonis and its people from an even greater peril than their own dissension, that of the Fell Alliance, the union which Ravinia has formed among all the wicked Barada of the Elder Forest.
Aradis's evening had already become more outlandish than he could ever have imagined, but this was too much.
Who does Telion think I am? And why in all Orona has he decided I should go do this thing?
He blurted out.
I've heard of witches, I suppose, but I did not know they really existed. But from everything I've heard about them, it sounds as if they're unspeakably powerful. What qualifications have I for saving a kingdom and defeating a witch?
None whatsoever.
Nagello responded bluntly.
You are not being sent because there is something remarkable about you, Aradis Kingblade. Rather, it is because Telion desires to extend Kishara unto you, that you may join the ranks of the Staffborn. And Kishara is a great treasure indeed, one that the mercy of Telion alone can provide in full. In short, lad, the true purpose of my coming is to proclaim that the call of the Danna has been issued unto you.
The call of the Danna?
Aradis asked, uncertain of whether that was something he really wished to receive or not.
Yes, it is the greatest call that any Barada could ever receive. It is a greater call even than that which you are being given in the quest in the Elder Forest. It must be understood that your business in Argonis is a call of the Danna, but not the call. Yet in that quest, you are being offered a magnificent opportunity, Aradis. Know this, and know it truly. Telion will use you to destroy the witch and save Argonis if you will let him. But a greater glory than this is the Kishara of which I spoke, the Kishara which is the inheritance of the Staffborn.
Kishara? The Staffborn?
Aradis repeated these words, which had only served to increase his mystification.
You may as well be speaking in another tongue, for I know nothing of these things. Tell me plainly, what does the Danna mean to do with me?
Nagello looked sternly into Aradis's eyes, then said slowly,
He means to kill you, Aradis, in order that you may live.
Extreme exasperation now gave way to complete stupefaction. Aradis's jaw dropped open in disbelief as he exclaimed,
So I am to be sent halfway across the world to be murdered?
I am not speaking of the sort of death you are thinking of, Aradis. Death to you means only such things as slaughter by the sword, or succumbing to disease, or falling to the relentless decay of old age. I am not speaking of the death of your body, which is what you imagine, but you are not yet ready to see what I am speaking of. That time will come, though, sooner than you expect. Yes, your eyes will see as they have never seen before. But now you must go to your home, for your father has something to give you. Immediately after you have received it from him, you will go east across the plains to Tarwin.
So I am to leave my father in his weak and sickened condition?
Whether you go or stay, Your father's health rests in the Danna's providence, not your own.
Aradis could see the sense in this, but it still deeply troubled him.
I will be able to say farewell to my family before I leave then?
He queried.
Only to your father.
Nagello said, as he started off through the forest back toward the meadow and motioned for Aradis to follow him. Indignant, Aradis exclaimed,
Can I not kiss my sister Melora and my mother Arabeth goodbye?
If you awaken them, their sorrow at your departure will only be made that much worse. If you trust Telyon, as I hope you will let them sleep, and he will comfort them in the morning when they learn you are gone.
What of my brother? Am I not allowed to mend my quarrel with him and apologize for the things I said in foolish anger?
Nagello replied,
Not at this time, for you made the choice to act as you did when you were in the forge a few hours ago, and now you must live with the bitter fruit of your deeds.
Aradis sighed heavily, greatly grieved at what was soon to befall him, for he knew he must leave that very night as Nagello had said, and he had not the presence of mind to even think about this task he had been given to accomplish in the Elder Forest. It was too foreign, too fantastic to even contemplate. He would simply have to go step by step if he were going to do it at all. Soon they reached the edge of the meadow and stood still in the soft moonlight. Nagello then turned to address the lad once more.
Now, Aradis,
He said,
it is imperative that you recognize that what you are being asked to do is absolutely impossible, as the Barada might reckon it. That needs to be made perfectly clear. I do not wish for any false hopes to present themselves to you.
Aradis's heart sank, his mind staggered, and he felt a cold despair rising within him. But he was so struck by this revelation that he remained mute. Then Nagello's voice rose like fiery dawn over the plains.
But do not be afraid of what is to come, for what is impossible for the Barada can yet be accomplished. That which you have been commissioned to do can indeed be brought to completion. The call of the Danna will not be without effect, yet it will not find its fulfillment in Aradis Kingblade, but in Telyon himself, who shall stand behind you, and before you, and beside you, when you go into the dark places of Orona. And make no mistake, your path will be dark and terrible. Before all comes to an end in fury and fire, shadows will pursue you, and blackness will hem you in. Night will bear down upon you, and you will nearly succumb unto the weeping of death itself. But there will always be a way of hope, a way of escape. And this will be the doing of the Danna. In all things you must pursue him and the road he has laid before you. But imagine not for one moment that you will succeed by your own power or your own strength. The tasks you have been given are grave indeed, and they are far beyond the ability of even the mighty among the Barada to accomplish. You are small in strength. Help must come from beyond you, for it will by no means come from within you. And yet in all this, do not think that the might of Telyon absolves you of the responsibility to act. Act you must, or you will indeed fail, but you must act in the strength you are given, and hope will be poured out from on high as a light unto you.
Aradis inhaled deeply, his very soul sapped and his body on the verge of collapse from the gravity of what Nagello had just told him. Then, looking up at the darkened firmament, sparkling with the silver gleam of the moon and stars, he thought of Erdion, the land where the Danna dwelt, and he thought of the hope which would cascade from that high realm upon him when things were blackest and despair had nearly crushed him. He had a small taste of that remarkable hope and comfort even now. Now, looking back at Nagello, he expelled his breath and awaited the last words of the Chassidim. Nagello then laid his hand upon Aradis' shoulder.
"Now, take this,"
he said, as he handed the lad an object about half the size of his palm that appeared to be some sort of medallion or amulet. The medallion looked to be the right half of a splendid emerald leaf edged by finely wrought silver. It seemed as if the other half had been unevenly sundered from it, and so the piece which Aradis held looked decidedly incomplete. The medallion shard was attached to a thin silver chain, so that it could be worn as a necklace.
What's this?
Aradis asked.
"You will not need this for some time, but it will have a tremendous role to play in your quest before all is said and done. There will come a time when you will require this medallion to win the aid of those who doubt you, even after someone they respect has spoken highly of you. It will be a great sign unto them. Do not worry about when to reveal it, for it shall be made manifest at the proper time."
More riddles?
Aradis asked, as he hung the medallion around his neck and tucked the emerald leaf shard into his tunic.
"They are mysteries now,"
Nagello concurred.
"but they will soon be unveiled."
Then he handed Aradis a heavy leather pouch.
And what am I to do with this?
Aradis inquired.
"Purchase passage for 2 from Tarwin to Dankdox."
For 2? Will I not be alone? Who is going with me?
The lad asked, as he attached the money pouch to his belt.
"Your friend Girion Ringmark."
Nagello replied, smiling.
But how, in the name of all that is sane and decent, am I going to convince Girion to go with me on this mad venture?
Asked Aradis, who was dumbfounded and delighted all at once.
"You will not need to,"
Nagello assured him.
"Now, make haste. Return to your home. Get that which is needed from your father, and not else, for all your needs of food and supplies will be taken care of. Then hurry to Girion's house, and he will be waiting for you there. After that, immediately set out eastward, and you will have covered many miles by dawn. Your travel this night is much needed,
The Chassidim went on.
for you must reach Tarwin ere the 4th passing of Marda from that which has just transpired, the 4th twilight from this moment. And mark this well, Aradis Kingblade. Whatever may befall you, you must not turn around, not for any reason. I say unto you, as surely as Telion dwells in Rostobeth, all shall go ill and come to ruin if you should come back to Siloa before your quest is ended. And you must on no account stop at the house of anyone until you have reached the town of Hardenak, a little more than 30 miles to the east of here. You cannot delay. You must journey straight on until dawn, for there is a need of haste of which you yet know not."
But what is...
Aradis stammered, but Nagello instantly cut him off.
"There is no time to lose. Your lingering doubts will be quelled later, not now."
Now Aradis turned to go, realizing he could receive no further consolation from the Chassidim. Suddenly, he felt Nagello's firm grasp upon his shoulder. He turned to look back into the Hadathi's face and saw his eyes flickering with the glories of Erdion.
"Remember all that I have said to you,
Nagello charged the young Siloan.
and do not fail to follow even the least of the instructions I have given you from Telion. Now go!"
He finished abruptly. Aradis took this command quite seriously and began running full bore across the flowering meadow. When he was a ways out, he turned back and looked at Nagello, who stood half under the shadow of the trees. Nagello raised his hand in farewell, and Aradis hurried on. When he had gone a little farther, he looked back again and saw that the Chassidim had disappeared. Whether he had gone back into the forest, or returned to the Hadra, invisible now to mortal eyes, Aradis knew not. His mind was reeling as he raced over the crest of the hill and saw the little village of Siloa in the valley below. Thin trails of smoke rose from the chimneys. The lights of hearth fires had died down in nearly every home, and even the windows of the plowman's shanty were dim. Not a soul could be seen in the streets, and all was hushed. Aradis hurried down the hill and through the alley that ran along the north side of his house. Around front, he quietly opened the door and went inside. His father was sitting in a crude chair by the hearth, stroking his brown beard and staring at the dying embers in the fireplace.
Aradis,
He coughed softly as he looked up.
I'm glad you're home. I thought you might have spent the night at Girion's. It's nearly midnight now.
Aradis realized that a great deal of time must have passed since he fainted from seeing Nagello's true form. But he could only think of one thing to say to his father.
Have you ever been given a message directly from the Danna?
He asked. Girion began to answer, but stopped short, his mouth still open, and his countenance suddenly grew very strange indeed. For a moment, Aradis thought he had gone into a trance, but Girion then muttered slowly, as if he were talking to himself.
Is this the night he spoke of, then?
Father, do you know a Hadathi named Nagello?
Aradis asked, looking straight at him. Girion glanced up to meet his son's gaze, smiling, and said,
Yes, I know him. And I see you now know him too. Come, I have something to give you.
Aradis could contain his bewilderment no longer.
My mortal mind!
He uttered incredulously, once more completely stunned.
What is all this about? Why did you never tell me of these things? How can it be that you are giving me something just as Nagello said you would? How much of this world have I been ignorant of my whole life? What is going to happen to us? To me? To you? To our whole family?
Girion ignored his son's barrage, grabbed a crowbar from a pile of assorted tools near the hearth, and then walked over to a particular floorboard in the middle of the room. As Aradis watched, his father, with some effort, pried up the board as quietly as he could, so as to not waken the others slumbering behind the closed door to the Kingblade's sleeping quarters. To Aradis's astonishment, Girion reached into the dark hole beneath the board and drew out a sword with a rather unremarkable black metal sheath. Then he pushed the board back down and handed the blade in its sheath to Aradis.
This is Brightbeam,
he said solemnly.
a blade I bore for some time. Now you must bear it. At last, all the time I spent teaching you the way of the blade out in the forest when you were a child will be put to good use. For surely I did not endow such knowledge and skill unto you purely for your own enjoyment. Though there is no need for swords in Siloa, there will come a time in the near future when you will be glad that Brightbeam is your companion.
Looking the scabbard up and down, Aradis declared,
I do remember well how you took me many an evening up into the woods to show me how to wield a sword properly. But I never imagined that you were preparing me for a time such as this. So you knew all along. Every time we went out for swordplay, you knew this day would come.
Yes, son, I did.
Girion returned gently.
Why didn't you tell me?
Wisdom would have been thwarted if I had. Either you would not have believed me, as often you have been prone to doubt things I have told you, especially about the deep lore of Orona, things about Telion and the Hadathi, and the Forgotten Days. Or else it would have gone to your head. For it is a heavy burden for a lad to know that he will someday be summoned to accomplish a great task by the Danna himself.
I suppose you're right.
Aradis said thoughtfully.
Father, how did you come by the sword?
He asked as he quietly drew the blade out a few inches and looked upon it. Girion chuckled softly and then coughed.
That's a long tale indeed, my boy, and one neither you nor I have time for this night. I will tell you that story upon your return.
How do you know I'll be coming back?
Aradis pressed.
Nigelo told me Talion intended to kill me.
Of course he does.
Girion replied matter-of-factly.
No better fate could befall you. But as for how I know you'll be returning, long ago an old Yeti by the name of Toldrak began telling me a story that, unfortunately, he was unable to finish. And yet Nigelo promised me, by the power of the Danna, that my firstborn son would tell me the end of that very important story. And you, my lad, are my firstborn son. When you return, I fully expect I will hear the end. So we shall each tell each other our stories when we meet again. For I have a story to tell you as well.
Aradis was desperate for answers.
Story? What story? Father, there is so much I do not understand. Can this really be happening to me? To us? What do you know about all this? Please help me. Am I losing my mind?
Don't worry. You're quite sane.
Girion said, smiling.
But your mind certainly is being opened tonight. So it may feel like you're losing what you have. Trust me, this change is for the best. Now you must go without delay, just as Nigelo said.
How did you know Nigelo told me to leave immediately?
Aradis returned.
He told me.
Girion answered dryly, blinking.
When? Tonight?
No. A long time ago.
Girion said, his voice trailing off, lost in the memory.
Tell me what happened to you.
Aradis demanded.
Did Nigelo send you halfway across the world too? Tell me about this sword.
There's no time now, Aradis.
Girion insisted.
You must go now. Do not linger here.
Aradis cast his arms about his father, whispering,
I love you, Father, and I don't want to leave, but I know I must. Yet, I don't know if I'll ever come back alive.
He said, as tears began to form in his eyes.
And I want so much for you to get better, and for everything to be all right, and for us to have enough money, for me to stop fighting with Tarek, and for Mother and Melora to be provided for.
The eyes of the Danna will ever be upon us, Aradis, and they also will be upon you. You will come back alive. Have no doubts about that. The story must be finished. Thus it was foretold, and thus shall it be.
Girion consoled his son as he held him tightly. Aradis was greatly comforted in this, but still as mystified as ever.
I love you, Father.
He breathed again, releasing him from the embrace. Quickly, he went over to the door, knowing that he would not leave if he did not force himself to do so.
I know,
Girion said affectionately. Aradis looked longingly at the door to the sleeping chambers. He so wished to say farewell to his mother, his dear sister Melora, and even lazy, bad-tempered Tarek, but he remembered what Nigelo had told him. Girion saw his glance and said,
It will be much better if you don't waken them. If you do, you will not be able to leave,
and their hearts will be more broken than they would be if they simply awoke in the morning to find you gone.
That's what Nagello said too.
Aradis sighed. And you would do well to trust him, Girion affirmed. Incidentally, where are you going? He added.
To Byram. To the Elder Forest. To defeat a witch named Ravinia and rescue a kingdom called Argonis.
Aradis replied, somewhat startled that he had just said this, as if it were something he were really going to go and do. Ah, good then, Girion said. You will learn much, I expect, and come back a better man. Now you must go, but we will have much to talk about upon your return, both for your part and mine. Girion then practically pushed Aradis out the door, saying, Goodbye, son. I love you very much, and Tellion will be with you.
You too, Father.
Aradis returned softly as Girion closed the door, and Aradis was left alone in the night once more. The lad knew it was best not to linger, so he left the silent, starlit central street of Siloa and headed through an alleyway that led toward the east edge of town, and thus in the direction of the Ringmark farm. It was, in fact, the very same alleyway between Gandrion's house and Feynard's tailor shop that he had taken around sunset. Then he climbed up out of the shallow valley in which Siloa lay, and hastened down the path that led through the fields of standing grain. In a short while, he reached the Ringmark's farmhouse, and sure enough, Girion was standing outside waiting for him, leaning on a walking staff. He was dressed in the same outfit he had been wearing earlier, a white shirt with blue stitching, a leather jerkin and girdle, dark brown breeches, and tall black leather boots. Aradis ran up to him, panting,
How can this be?
What? That I'm waiting for you? Girion grinned. Nagello said that you'd be surprised, even though he would have told you about this ahead of time.
You met Nagello too?
Aradis asked, shocked for not the first time that night. Just a while ago, Girion replied. He told me about everything, and I prepared to leave shortly thereafter.
It sounds as if we have a great deal to talk about.
Aradis laughed, still amazed by it all. Indeed we do, Girion concurred. But let us talk as we go along the road. There is a long journey ahead of us tonight.
And for some time to come,
Aradis added, as the two of them set out upon their eastward journey across the plains of Agleri. Up above, the stars shone with a cool, pale light, and the fields of golden grain were all tinged with the magical blue hue of starlight and moonlight mingled together. By the edge of the pine woods, the village of Siloa slept peacefully under the blanket of night. And in the west, a blue streak of light, just like a shooting star, rose up from Rimwold Forest and vaulted high into the heavens, where it disappeared from sight.